ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and everybody in between.
He's your favorite Mexican-American Gemini from South Texas. It's Chibbi.
And she's the lipstick-loving Salvadorican from Brooklyn, New York. It's Raqui.
And this is Words and Shit,
the show where you get to know the person behind the poetry.
Brought to you by Write Art Out.
What up, Raqui?
Hi, how you doing, friend?
I mean, we hanging in there, looking good, feeling fine, all that stuff.
Look at you.
You know, I see you got your gold hoops in.
Always. This is like my go-to, like, let's do it. Let's rock it.
Well, I know we see each other on a weekly basis right here, which is great and all, but I'm like hella even more warmed and connected because we actually got to see each other in person this past week, socially distanced, of course, safely, because you're visiting right now in Texas. So I just want to tell you, we loved your visit. Okay.
I did too. I was so excited. Like I was telling people, I was like, wow, I was invited to Chibbi's place and Chibbi's and Corey's place, even though like your husband was like, yeah, I'll spray you down with Lysol because this is how serious we take it. Yeah. But it was so much fun. I loved it. But yeah, like you said, I only have like basically a week and a half left in Texas before I go to my other home, right, in New York. And that's always and that's always been like a huge conversation with me and like my friends of like, where's home for me? All the time. And I think home is like a huge concept for anyone, right? We can create our own home. Home is where we've been born. This constant movement of people of like migrating, whether they're forced or not forced, right, voluntarily, to different places and trying to find home there. So I definitely wanted to talk about that.
I totally get what you mean because like I was born in Guadalajara, but I never like lived there. I grew up in Laredo, Texas on the border. And so that was kind of home. But then I lived in Austin for so long that felt like home, and then spent some time in Houston, and now I'm in San Antonio. And it's this idea of like, what does home really mean, right? And where you're from. And I think for me, it's how we carry this idea of home with us, right? Wherever we're at, we take our family and our culture and our history with us through this world. Even if when I go visit my cousins in Mexico, they're like, "You have such a funny accent." You know, what is it like for you?
So yeah, it's basically like you're never enough for nobody, right? Like I definitely was born in the East Coast. I took even a couple of years in Puerto Rico, which was like super weird, right? Because I was like, I'm Puerto Rican. They're like, no, you're American. I was like, mind blown. What are you talking about? In New Jersey, they call me like Boricua, like, you know, and they're like, you are from the mainland. And then coming to Texas, where people just thought I was Mexican. And it's like, no, it is a lot, you know, but I definitely, through this migration, I really identify with like words of being what it is to be a diasporican or within these diasporas, right? This constant movement of migration, and also trying to find a place in home.
It's funny you say that about like going to Puerto Rico and being like, I'm Puerto Rican. They're like, no, you're not. It happens in the reverse. Like when I first went to college in Austin, I was like, I'm an American. They're like, no, you're Mexican American. And I was like, what? But I love that you bring up this idea of like home and identity and all that, because our guest tonight talks a lot about that idea of what home is and really embracing where he comes from and where the spaces that he moves through now. So can you tell us a little bit about our feature tonight?
I'm really excited because this poet is from New York. So what? I know I'm not in New York, but I'm just like really excited that we have this poet. So our poet is a poet and musician, Bonafide Rojas. He was born and raised in the Bronx, the boogie down Bronx. What? He is the author of 4 collections of poetry: Pelo Bueno, A Day in the Life of a Nuyorican Poet, When the City Sleeps, Renovatio, and Notes on the Return to the Island. He founded Grand Concourse Press, named after the thoroughfare he grew up on, in 2012. Rojas identifies as one of the next generation of Nuyorican poets. Rojas is the 2002 Slam This champion and has performed on HBO's Deaf Poetry Jam, as well as in numerous venues in New York City and internationally. His writings, I know, right? His writing appears in journals and anthologies that include Bum Rush the Page, Apolitical, Black in Literature and Art. He's a guitar player and leader of the rock group Mona Passage. He lives in New York City and travels frequently to Puerto Rico, where he lectures on poetry with the hope, according to Alonso, of inspiring the next generation of Nuyorican poets. So let's give it up to an OG from the South Bronx, Nuyorican poet, Bonafide.
Well, welcome to the show.
Hello. Well, you never get I never get comfortable with bios. I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
it's okay. Just
Yeah.
You've done so much. You've done so much.
no, I started young. That's what it is. I started young,
Mm,
and yeah. So hi.
still doesn't change the fact that you've done a lot. So
Yeah, I do my best. I try my best. Thank you.
So we always like to start off like, when we invite friends over or poets over, like we're going to get to know you intimately. So we always want to start off like, how's your heart doing? How's your heart doing today, this week, this month?
You might have opened up the wrong can, but it's okay. So last Saturday was my mom's anniversary for her death, and today is the anniversary of her wake. So I've been balancing that. I think what I've been doing the last couple of years is trying to make myself as busy as possible, because I already spent the couple of years, wallowing and soaking around. Last year I was probably just working, just trying to make some. But a couple of years ago, around this time, I was in Puerto Rico and I found a resting spot for my mother and my father's ashes. So I'm good. I mean, I wanted to get away this week, but COVID's interesting, right? COVID's allowed me not to do things, and some other people that that's them. They can do whatever they want, but for me, I'm just trying to navigate through these waters and be patient with myself. And I've spent a good portion of the last 7 years traveling, so those things don't really bother me. But I save money.
Yeah. I've been following you for quite some time, and I know you post a lot about your mom because she's like so important to you. I just want to say, from the pictures and everything you like shared, she's absolutely gorgeous, like beautiful, and I could tell like with her spirit, she was probably like your biggest fan, larger than life personality. So
larger than life. Yet no, she loved the poetry and was really critical about my music. And I used to be like, I don't want to talk to you about the music no more. She's like, I don't really like rock music. I'm just like who raised me? Like, how did I get here?
did
you Rock? Were you at the Lincoln Center show?
I was. That was the first time I ever met you.
Yeah. So she was there. She was there. I have that video, and that was the last time she was. No, second to last time she saw me read, because I think I had a book party that I told the party, hey, you guys gotta wait. My mom's not here yet. So but that was that was the last time she was out. No, so that was the last public, I think, appearance that she made. That and the book party. But, it's been a really weird couple of years in that sense of being in this weird fraternity of being an orphan, right? After she passed away in New York, got really weird for me. Like 2018 was a really difficult year of just trying to figure out what I wanted to do. Right. Like I was freelancing so much. I could go wherever I wanted. But yeah, that was like a real big year of just like sitting on the couch and just doing nothing and writing, which I was really surprised about. I was surprised I wrote so much about it. But those aren't the easiest poems to read. Like, hey, let's read this poem. It's gonna make you really depressed. And they're like, well, why are we clapping?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I love hearing how big of a supporter she was for you. Not everyone gets that, where their parents are like fully supportive of their arts. I'm lucky to where my parents will drive across the state if I'm performing somewhere, So like, it's good to hear that you had a lot of that, and sounds like she was, like Rocky said, your biggest fan.
Yeah, she was a trip.
Except for the music.
I remember one show. So I was singing in the house, and I don't have the best singing voice, especially when I was younger. And she's like, "Oh, that's really good. You're still doing poetry, right?" I'm like, and then she saw the band once, and she was like, "Oh, that was better. You've been getting better." I'm just like, "Get out my face!" I'm like, "Get out of here." She was sassy. I give her that much. She was sassy.
Just
Latina mothers.
I was
Right. I was gonna say Latina mothers and their backhanded compliments.
Right? She was 5 feet, and she would get in my face. I'm just like, "Get out of here." Yeah.
Well, let's jump into the conversation. We like to just let the audience get to know you a little bit before we hear some of your work. So we're going to start with a segment that we like to call speed dating. So we're going to hit you with some questions, and feel free to answer these as in-depth or as concise as you feel like you need to answer them, okay?
Okie doke.
So question number 1, how would your favorite person describe your poetry?
Reflective, detailed, meticulous, a lot of list poems. Yeah.
No shame.
No, not at all. Please. I enjoy telling a good story. Emotional. I rarely ever read in public without paper. I don't care to memorize anymore, so it's always paper in front of me. Mad Puerto Rican, mad rock and roll. Right. Right, passionate. Right, passionate is a good word. It's a good word. And we can stop there.
Okay.
But I was gonna like speed dating bone. Like,
you're like, it's okay.
Yeah. Don't mind me. I keep looking at my hair, and I'm like, can my part stay there, please?
No, it's okay, because I feel like my part's never in the middle, and I'm just like.
That's why I carved mine into my head. All right, go, Rocky.
All right. Okay. So this is definitely like, I want to know, because I love to go to bodegas, right? In New York. I learned about like these bodega cats that blew my mind, but I don't trust bodega if they don't have a bodega cat, right? So when you go to your bodega, like what is your go-to item to get there? Like to get at your bodega?
Okay, so it's a 2-part answer. So if it's a regular bodega, it's usually a Diet Pepsi and a honey bun. Almost everyone I know, this is kind of ridiculous. But now the one I go to to have dinner, it's usually a cheeseburger and fries. If I'm feeling healthy, I'll get a salad, which is once in a blue. But the honey bun, oh yeah, everyone knows that. Everyone knows I drink. So I only drink diet soda. So everyone gets on my case about that. I'm like, whatever. Like you don't have vices. And yeah, but honey bun, I've been eating honey buns forever. And I'm always really grateful because I don't think I look like someone who's been snacking on the worst things in the world.
I can relate. Okay, so on the subject of food, then, what is your favorite Puerto Rican dish? Hardball questions.
Well, growing up, the amount of arroz con bichuela and chicken was almost like, you had a working mom, a single working mom. So she definitely just made it often. But if I'm picking like a real like Puerto Rican or Caribbean dish, it's probably a pastelón.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Yeah, I love pastelón. It's a pastelón is like a sweet plantain lasagna.
Yes.
Yeah, so you take the shells out and you replace it with maduros, and it's exquisite.
I'm putting that one on my list.
And close second, especially when I'm feeling saucy, is a mofongo de maduro with chicken in it. And not many places make that. They'll just keep it regular, but mofongo de maduro. I had a space in Puerto Rico I went to. When they're like, yeah, sure. I was like, oh.
Oh man. Do you? I know that we're on the side of Puerto Rican food, but I'm like, do you like cuchifrita, like in Brooklyn?
Yeah. Have I been there? Do I like them?
Do you? Oh, do you like them?
I know because the Bronx. I mean, at one point the Bronx had a cuchifritos in every other corner. I do. I think a lot of times I'm wary of too much greasy food because I know I eat a lot of greasy food. But at cuchifritos, sometimes the pork that they have there is like so it's very juicy. Even though I don't eat a lot of pork, though, that's the thing. So like I don't eat a lot of pernil, which I think everyone looks at me like I'm crazy. Like I go, I know. And then I blame hip hop for that. I blame hip hop as a teenager, not eating pork, thinking I was a Muslim. I was like, this is it. And my mom's like, you don't want pork? I go, just give me a lasagna and give me some chicken and I'll be fine.
All right. All right. Well, thanks. All right. So our last question is, what is your favorite literary device?
Fucking people haven't asked me that question in damn years. You're killing. I mean, I don't know. I'll say like, it may not be a device per se, but it's definitely a form. Like I prefer especially when I'm fleshing out ideas, I use a list poem first. Then I go through a lot of my editing processes. Hasn't changed that much, but my approach to writing has changed a lot through the last 15 years. And I try to write in different voices, but still seem authentic enough for me, because I feel sometimes we get we get caught up in performance, and it changes the way we would write things that will only live on the page and won't ever be spoken out loud. So I think for me, I approach the page to be what it is, to live on page really well, and then I'll manifest it differently in performance. I mean, there's some poems that are just so dense with the language I'm using. I'm like, this doesn't sound like it should be performed. But you make it work, right? You make it work. Yeah. So I think yes, I'll take that. There is do I have it here? There's a book here. There's a book by that is called The Handbook of Poetic Forms by Ron Padgett. That's always been something I go to because they have 67 things there. And, I like villanelles and I like sonnets and sestinas. I like all the really hard forms that you have to like kind of structure yourself into it. Like I like the quatrains, the cinquains. I went through a whole period of writing all those things. The amount of like haikus and small base forms, which because I can tend to write a lot. So if I can like shorten those into like 6 lines, I do my best with that. I try to do my best with those.
Yeah. And that's totally valid. Like sometimes just the list idea is a way to just get the words on the page. And even if it doesn't end up as a list poem, that just helps you just kind of like create that foundation. So I love that. I love me a good list poem. All right. Well, speaking of poetry then, let us dive into the poetry. Rooster's geeking, fangirling about Sestinas. Sestinas are still kicking my ass. But before we dive into the poetry, to the audience that's watching out there in Facebook Landia and YouTubeville, use the comment section, y'all. We see the comments clearly. If you have a question for Bonafide, put it in the comment section. We'll get around to it. You just want to show some love, put it in the comment section. All right, so use the comment section, y'all. But that being said, we're going to transition. The show is yours, sir. Please grace us with some poetry.
Okay, great. Wow, look at all the space on the TV now. Hey, everybody. We're going to roll through a few poems. I'm going to start one off. We're talking about lists, right? We're going to start one called 30 Ways of Looking at a Nuyorican. 1. I do not wake up to roosters. I wake up to construction sites and exhaling buses. 2. English was fed to me by my television babysitter. 3. I barely know what oceans look like. Orchard Beach and Brighton Beach do not count. 4. I know how to grow culture, but I don't know how to grow food. I buy rice in bags, beans in cans, and piraguas in Union Square. 5. My skin is pale. My cousin's skin is black. We are called white boy and negro at the same time, at the same table. 6, I do not know how to hotwire a car just because I'm Puerto Rican, right? But I don't even know how to drive. 6, I have a fear of needles, so being junkie is out. Being a thief, sometimes. 8, I have a library of dead heroes that I have stolen. 9, as I remember it, I've been called Jewish more times after I turned 21 for whatever reason. I'm mad Puerto Rican. 10, I do not believe in haircuts until I cut my hair again. 11, when riding the train, everyone could be Nuyorican, but most are New Yorkers. 12, I always get lost in Queens. 13, I walked into a riot once and immediately walked out. 14, Excelsior. 15, in my house, pictures of Albizu Campos, Jimi Hendrix, Che Guevara, Asada Shakur, the Beatles, and Jesus Christ all hang next to each other. 16, people make fun of me for not knowing how to drive. Then they visit New York City and completely understand why. 17, police have stopped me for looking too out of place. I was standing in front of my building of over 30 years. 18, when in London, searching for a Puerto Rican flag is trying to find a needle in a brick wall. 19, Nuyorican dance in their sleep. 20, Spanish does not make you Nuyorican. English does not make you Nuyorican. 21, Pedro, Papoleto, Miguel, Tato, Sandra, Luis, Jorge, Algarin, and Bimbo walk into a bar and perform magic, perform beautiful magic. 22, my obituary is not written yet. 23, when I returned to Puerto Rico, everyone stared at me when I spoke. I think it was my New York accent. 24, my son was born in Chicago, lived in Harlem, lives in Michigan, is Puerto Rican and Irish, and I keep his heart in the Bronx. 25, Nuyorican look like everyone, Nuyorican look like no one. 26, I'm like every Puerto Rican you know. I'm not like any Puerto Rican you know. 27, in the middle of the bandera is the heart of a Nuyorican. Ask Betances. 28, El Morro is more famous than the Empire State Building. 29, a Nuyorican and a Puerto Rican walk into a bar and they both ask for Cuba Libre. 30, Patria, Sangre, Libertad. Thank you. The next poem I'm going to read is a poem that I was kind of referring to a second ago when talking to Chibbi and Raquel. It's a poem I wrote in Notes on a Return to the Island. It was called Home is the Flower of the Land. And it's written in couplets. And one of the more interesting tidbits about this particular poem is that it's now on the Mona Passage record, The New Myths, under the title called Tierra, where I took sections of this piece and then Yabe, the singer, sang the chorus. So I'm going to read the whole poem, and then eventually you'll hear the new record, and you'll see what I did with that. Home is the flower of the land. Tierra is the first word the island teaches us. The wind is our navigator through this land of the valiant Lord. The coasts are crystalline cobalt blue, and we give all the hurricanes names. These pueblos of deserts and jungles open the roads to the edge of history. We are measured in size, location, harmonized in a minor key. We carry forced exoduses on our backs. Our blood is a lineage of caña y café. Columns of smoke obscure the clarity of this gorgeous sky. 78 provinces from end to end, from faro to faro. We erect gigantic billboards of foreign products, molasses and gasoline. Electric poles line the island like sheet music. Our technical progress has invaded the countryside. We torture the muscles of these mountains. These small towns are being reconstructed, transformed by irrigation, radio waves, and smartphones. We increase the speed of development on our backs and legs. Tomorrow seems like a frightening place of radioactive beaches, plastic forests, hydraulic cities, and neon mountainsides. This exploding superpopulation will not culturally develop the next. We need to defend this island from the statues that represent an oppressive future. We cannot assure ourselves the air we breathe will always be free. We cannot assure that these homes of ours will always belong to us and not a bank full of leeches. The geographic positioning of our land has determined the course of our history, our sovereignty, our strategy. We are forced collective personality, casualties of imperialism in between two Americas. We lack volume. We lack ports. Our island can be seen in 2 days. Tourism is a mirror ball and chain. Our reflections bear a narrow house cramped by the plains and valleys. Our vision is a trip through this immediate extension of our landscape. If we stretch our bodies far enough, we can touch the four corners. Our history would have been different if our land was different. Our heroes, our fighters who did not fit in, who fled and died in foreign lands, may have been treated differently because of the lack of space needed to create. It wouldn't have been an issue. Everyone's perspectives would have been broader. So we are geological positioning, invigorating climates, biological constitutions, imperial landscapes trapped in a perpetual cycle of self-destruction, operating on our own collective psychosis. We were once woods, pastures, swamps, and untapped potential. Now a paradise in a schizophrenic conundrum, divided by invisible titles of state and independence. We are jibaros with satellite dishes, farmers that carry computers, fast food, fast highways, corporate tools, and monopolizing landlords. Our hearts sit on the land of rediscovery. Our hands balance the conflict and cooperation. Home is the flower of the land. Caribbean and Atlantic picturesque. Our expression is coupled with our anguish of yearning for freedom. Our memories made of lumber, metal, history, poetry, folklore, and tradition. This land and country's long fight for the people and our self-defining rose. These coasts are crystalline cobalt blue, and we give all the hurricanes names. The wind is our navigator through this land of the valiant Lord. Libertad is the first word we taught ourselves. Tierra is the first word the island taught us. Thank you. So I'm going to stay with poems of notes on a return to the island. There's always so much I want to talk about. But let's do one. Let's see. So I have a 17-year-old son. I know. Amazing, right? How do I have a 17-year-old son? I look so young. And his name is John Pablo. He is a brilliant young man. He's a cello player. And there was a point where I always wanted to make him the protagonist in some of these poems. So this is one of them. And it is called John Pablo Rojas is a Comet Crashing Out the Sky. Among the dead flocks of birds shaped in V formation at Grand Army Plaza, atop of the weeds in the concrete, in the text messages in the South Bronx, beneath the streets, beneath Woodlawn Cemetery, beneath the pigeons, beneath the skyscraping towers of capitalism, he came crashing out the sky. Farther down, forgotten demigods, formerly elected officials, and washed-up rookie baseball players, staring into the black, beyond the street and block, beyond the bridge and river, beyond borough and island, beyond cause and effect over genocide and gangbanging, corruption and city officials, consumptions and consumerism, underdeveloped communities, malnourished imaginations, corporate gentrification versus community salvation, next to safe deposit banks of safety depending pockets of the poor, next to the dilapidated condos of their tiny dreams, the trust-funded education degree dripping from their mouths. Everyone is trying to leave their immortality in my skull, inside the Centrally Park Cemetery in the middle, among the activists with blindfolds on, in the man-made cities in the skies, with their man-made titles of world domination. They chop our hands off, chop our head off. They buy our body parts, think everything is for sale. In the packed streets of Times Square, in the rush hour traffic, in the corrupt police precincts, in the overcrowded jails, in the racist white American court system, with the revolutionaries, the organizers, the drummers, the poets, the painters, the dancers, the rioters, the musicians, the migration, the lawyers, the strap hangers, the running lost, the mothers of dead children, the orphan children, the wind from the Gulf of Mexico reminding us of the memory of South America. And you'll see these ships with the names of dead American generals, and we're supposed to be happy when they say they come in peace, and the ocean is dead still. And all that I carry is an empty briefcase for possibility with our hearts, our fears, my heart, my fears, and I stare into the stars. I count the planets. I see the moon being master and servant. I see the sea serpents and 6 black hawks looking like shadows. And then he crashed out the sky with nothing, no name, no breath, no voice, naked, hoping to come home to a better world, to a better me. And when he arrived, he was so beautiful. Thank you. Okay, this is gonna be the last poem. Then I'll bring everybody back in. I'm just gonna pick a little older poem from When the City Sleeps. Let me just pick it up real quick. I want to thank everybody for coming out, spending their Thursday evening with us. Okay, this is called, trying to make sure I get it. Okay. This is called Dawn in New York. And it was, some people know, some people don't know, but this is completely inspired by Federico Garcia Lorca. And he wrote a book called Poet in New York, which was completely influential on why I wanted to write about New York when I was younger. It's called Dawn in New York. Dawn in New York, 1,000 buildings scream, streets gather human flesh faster than the subway can consume them. Dawn in New York, dead birds drop from the sky, suffocate on the pollution let out by these ants that march bumper to bumper, wings to wings. Dawn in New York, caterpillar cocoon, transit boxes vomit on every corner, and there is nothing the bluebirds can do about it. Dawn in New York is a ball of fire that never burns our faces off, and we never go blind staring at the beauty from atop of the crown of the empire. Thank you.
Take a bow, take a bow. Applause, 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 applause. The virtual world is weird. We try to be funny. Thank you for those words. Thank you for those poems and sharing that. That's very powerful as it's coming through in the comments section. People are living for it. I want to start off just kind of by defining terms, and get us all on the same page. So like for people that don't know, what does the term Nuyorican typically refer to? And then what does it mean to you to be Nuyorican?
You guys are not asking these short-winded questions. Like
no.
So Nuyorican was basically a portmanteau of the words New York and Puerto Rican, but it wasn't the first one that was being created. Neo-Rican was one, Nuevo Rican was another one. And these are all things that were, post 1950s migration in New York when, the 50s was the second or third wave of Puerto Ricans that came over from the island for, business and work reasons. And then Neo-Rican really started taking in the art world in the 70s when, the poets, the Nuyorican poets came about. But even then, they still weren't, they knew the term, but I don't think they identified as Nuyorican poets until after the book came out, which is right there, right? And it's you know, I think the biggest conversation I have these days about it is that I don't consider Nuyorican an identity, right? And I think people before me may have, maybe in the 70s and the 80s. I think they thought it was this replacement of identity, and it wasn't. It was, for me. I tell people all the time, it's a school of art, right? When you look at what art schools, right? The Dadaist, the Futurist, the Surrealists, what they all had language, they had art, and some even have music. And then when you look at Nuyorican, we do have all those things, right? Salsa is a pure Nuyorican art form, right? Started in the Bronx by a bunch of Puerto Ricans who lived in the Bronx, right? We have the literature, and the literature for Nuyorican doesn't just start with the poets. I mean, you can trace it back to Perry Thomas, who wrote this like landmark novel of Down East Main Streets, and it to be considered very much a Nuyorican novel. And then we think about art world. I mean, there's so many poets and painters that came out of New York in the 70s and 80s. For one is Tayel Boricua, who has they have an exhibit in the Museo de Barrio right now. So these things are all like foundational blocks for what a school of art would be. But I think there's always been a point that they're not necessarily intertangled, right? Right. The surrealists all knew each other, like, and I'm assuming that everyone knew each other. They just didn't really hang out. So when I talk to people now about, well, I think Nuyorican is a school of art, I think I just have to always remind people about how that got to a point, because the second generation of Nuyorican poets, which I would say Willie Perdomo, Tony Medina, La Bruja. I was the youngest one in that group, but like we were very different than the ones before that because they had to deal with certain identity issues. Granted, when we go back to Puerto Rico, I was definitely called a gringo, right? And when we're talking about this earlier, I lived in Puerto Rico for about 5-6 years, and for a long time it just didn't register, right? Because I did all my schooling in New York, and to think about the certain things that I've experienced as this like young Puerto Rican kid who just wanted friends, and they were like, "Ah, tú eres un gringo, tú eres de allá," right? When I wrote Notes on a Return to the Island, I didn't think I was going to write that book. Maybe not this soon. Like I really thought I was going to write this book about rock and roll, have my little guitars and everything, and look what I do. And for me to write this book about the Nuyorican diaspora, because it was these new conversations of being in my late 30s and talking to all these like young Puerto Ricans who don't have that same volatile nature that I experienced as a kid. Like no one ever called me. Like once in a while someone might say something like, "Te tú eres de allá," and I'm just like, well, what does that really mean, right? So the book is a concept of aquí and allá, right? That's the whole point of the book. But I just don't think there is an aquí and allá. Growing up, there might have been, because the concept of information was a lot slower than it is now, right? And now, since we have this internet and we're transferring ideas at such a rapid pace, that one, I don't think Nuyorican poets necessarily need to be from New York anymore. Again, it's a school, right? If the Beats had a school in New York and the Beats had a school in San Francisco, but they were still the Beats, they were just a New York school and a San Francisco school. I told young Puerto Rican people and writers that I met in Puerto Rico that no, you can completely be a Nuyorican. It's just this philosophical nature of, how to use your vernacular, right? Are you using, hip hop vernacular or like vernacular from that current generation, or like salsa and like what people were using in the streets, right? A lot of it also is completely influenced by Black American vernacular and Black English, right? So all those things, and that's I think that's also the biggest situation maybe between Puerto Ricans who grew up in New York versus most other cities, is how the Puerto Ricans in New York are completely immersed in the Black experience, because we don't have the overtly segregated cities the way other cities have. So that's so for me, Nuyorican, I think is a fantastic title for someone who is young and trying to like figure out where they are. And there's so much literature and things that you can really put yourself in this nice road of trying to deconstruct identity in a new way, because the next generation is so different than the one I grew up with. You know what I mean? So that's like the biggest thing, especially because, again, information and just traveling and transporting ourselves from here and there, those things are non-existent. You know, when I was young, as a teenager, I swore going anywhere was like this massive, I can't go anywhere, I'm broke. Now it's like, okay, let me just go on a plane and go somewhere. And I think that concept is also already embedded in people. If you want to go somewhere, you go somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so interesting the way that you kind of define what a Nuyorican is, because that is definitely not what I've been taught in like academia or, you know, in these other spaces. So I really love that. So I know, like, you know, definitely that the whole thing that it's a school of thought, right? And anyone can be a Nuyorican, the way that they write, you know?
So piggyback on what you just said in terms of how academia teaches it.
Yeah.
The professors I know in Puerto Rico teach a whole class on Nuyorican literature. But if you come to any other establishment in the United States, they'll give us 3 weeks. Right? It'll be maybe a couple of days in October where we could talk about Latino poets and Latinx poets. But I know for a fact I visited classes and they have this massive book on like Nuyorican literature, and I'm just like, what? I was like, what is this? And they're like, oh, because they see it as, oh wow, so these Puerto Ricans created this.
Yeah.
Right. And I think they understand what that is. Like the same way people look at salsa, like, oh, these Puerto Ricans created this. Yeah. And because we're on this side of the fence per se, you know, the people who do curriculums, since they're not Puerto Rican, they go, okay, we can put them in there.
Yeah. But, and I love how you liken it to like the Beats or something like that, to where it's like, it's a school of thought. It's people that just got together and created together. And it's a beautiful interpretation of the term that I'd never thought of. So like,
I mean, if I look at the Nuyorican poets that I really admire and really like, right? Some of them are really strange and left field, like Pedro Pietri. Right. Some are ridiculously political, like Tony Medina. Like I don't know if he ever writes anything that's not political, right? Because he thinks the political it could be a personal piece. Then you have these storytelling, the way Willie Perdomo writes and puts these things together is just like the coolest dude out here. So like all these little things, these poems that already exist, Puerto Rican Obituary, Nuyorican Blues, these poems are timeless, right? And that's what schools need, right? They want their howl, right? They want the wasteland. They want all these things that, well, this is what it is, and we have those. I just don't think it's always identified as that. Ura Yuang Noel wrote a book. He wrote a book called Invisible Nation, right? And when I told him my concept on it, he goes, "Oh, well, you should write it." I was like, "Don't do that. Like, I don't do research like that." But it was interesting thinking of here's this Puerto Rican, this brilliant Puerto Rican scholar and writer writing a book on Nuyorican when it should have been a Nuyorican who did it. But I'm just grateful the book even exists. So these are conversations I have all the time, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it's always a super, super complex, especially when even being Puerto Rican, right? It's just a huge complexity when you're even thinking about like the diaspora. So
what are you doing? Look, the complexities of a Puerto Rican stem from the fact that we do not suffer the same political nature everyone else does.
Yes.
In the Caribbean, the 4 islands of the Greater Antilles is a communist country, an independent nation that is kind of crappy. The first independent nation in the hemisphere, and then us, right? This weird, non-tangible commonwealth. So we have this relationship with the United States that's completely colonized and colonized. And then we're talking about from the day we were invaded in 1898, by 20 years later, there are people fighting in World War One. Right. So when you think about that concept of how we have to deconstruct the whole frame of thought of, well, in the grand structure of South America and Central America, Puerto Ricans really have to we're loud, right? We're proud.
Yeah.
But if we're talking about, hey, so we want to, and they look at you like, come come on, man. So those kind of spaces really, I always see myself in those spaces, and it's like we are the most complicated in terms of politics, hands down. And I think it really allows a weird conversation in that sense, right?
Let's talk about the conversation. Your last book, Notes on the Return to the Island, it is a lot about that idea of the experience of being Nuyorican. That one right there. The experience of being Nuyorican, but being Nuyorican in a Puerto Rican diaspora. Tell us a little bit about the journey of creating that book.
So the first poem I think I wrote in the collection was The Last Day. There was a professor who taught at CUNY and Columbia. His name was Juan Flores. He was this brilliant scholar, right? He's a brilliant scholar. I loved Juan. Juan was a funny dude. And I had saw him. There's a Puerto Rican saxophone player named Miguel Zinon, who is a good friend of mine, and he wrote a record called "Identities Are Interchangeable." So he has all these Puerto Ricans on the record, and me and Wang and the lady from Sesame Street, the Puerto Rican lady from Sesame Street. You know who she is. Trust me, you know who she is. So Miguel plays it at Carnegie Hall. So me and Wang are there, and we're like, oh, look at us. I go, look at us. I put a suit on for this. I was like, Puerto Ricans in Carnegie Hall. And that was the last time I saw him. And then someone contacted me and told me he had an aneurysm that December. And I was like, whoa, right? Out the blue, didn't see it coming. And that was the end of 2014. So 2015 comes around, and one of his colleagues from the University of Puerto Rico, Professor Jose Irizarry, sends me an email and he goes, hey, you were friends with Wang? I was like, yeah, hey, we're doing a symposium. Can you come down and, do a tribute for him? I was like, sure. So now the question, the reason why that email is so interesting and, shifting is I never read poetry in Puerto Rico before that. I would just go vacation, hang out. But I was always trying to there was a spot in Old San Juan that I would go to, but it was like, hey, we're bringing you down to read poetry to these students. And I was just like, okay. So it was myself and a friend of mine named Shaggy Flores. And, Shaggy, I don't even think he hasn't visited Puerto Rico in 20 years. So he was just like me. I was like, I've been here. I've done this. I've done this. But to be identified and looked at as this Nuyorican poet in front of these Puerto Rican people, that I started talking to all these people, and I'm looking at them. I was like, wow, I didn't really expect to be having conversations about rock music or anime with, mid-20s and mid-30-year-olds. So that was the first trip. That was, I think, April of 2015. And then I went to Puerto Rico every 3.5 months for the next 4 years. So by the time 2017 came around, I already had the manuscript done. I was just doing some edits, and I was doing, I believe, one of the Nuyorican class at the university, and the school gets taken over by the students, and they close everything down. So I was in Colegio in Mayagüez, which is probably a Thursday. Next day I go to Friday, and they take that school over too. And I'm like, hey, I'm supportive. I was like, but I have no work to do here now. So that's when I started writing the footnotes in the back of the book. And the footnotes, I think the footnotes came about with a conversation with some of the people I knew in the PhD program in Rio Piedra. And I was like, how does this sound? Because, poetry books don't really have footnotes. So they think it sounds good. And it's not, it's not an MLA. It's not this academic thing. It was really something that I wanted to do because I would have conversations with people. I mean, brilliant Afrofuturists, brilliant communists, about Puerto Ricans, and they would think Puerto Ricans got here in the 70s. And I was like, yeah, maybe 1870. I don't, like Puerto Rico, Puerto Ricans have been coming to the United States since the late 1800s, depending on what kind of education they had or scholarship. But after the Jones Act, they were coming out here by the thousands. So that was another reason why I did that. I wrote the footnotes, was to give people further understanding of how long Puerto Ricans have been here. And I get it, right? Puerto Ricans and Mexicans in our respective coasts were the first Spanish-speaking like group there. So in the way migration is, if you're first, you're laying all the groundwork down, which is why Puerto Ricans were popular all up to like 1980, when then like everybody showed up in New York and it was like, oh, okay, cool, and that's a whole other conversation about how I feel sometimes maybe the Puerto Ricans didn't capitalize enough in maybe a pop culture sense. They definitely did in New York, but and Chicago and Philly and Boston, like in these like cities with a huge Puerto Rican population. So 2017, I finished the book, and there's a term, and I'm not even sure if I even wrote it in the book, but something that's always been in my head is I've never felt Puerto Rican enough for other Puerto Ricans. I'm going to these like, functions and they're playing bomba, and I'm like, that's cool. I'm well versed in most of these things, and I'm just like, I wonder if they're gonna play Led Zeppelin today. Like it's the rock and roll in me really put me on this like outskirt in New York, and maybe not in Chicago. I definitely met a lot of like rock kids in Chicago and in San Francisco, but in Puerto Rico, they understood, because I think they started seeing rock music, metal, anime as this outside of art to counterattack what was the norm in Puerto Rico, be it salsa, be it reggaeton, and things like that. And they were just like, no, we don't really like that. And it was really interesting to see like these narratives always kind of come back around 360 depending on what generation. But yeah, I didn't think I was going to write this book. I definitely thought I'm working on 2 books now. One is for my mom and maybe my father, depends how I feel about him. But and this book about pop culture, and I thought the pop culture book would have been finished first. But when this book was done, I was like, all right, here we go. It was I'm grateful for that book. That book really changed how I looked at everything. Like, even before Hurricane Maria, I was really thinking about moving to Puerto Rico for a minute. But then Hurricane Maria and then my mom's passing changed that whole trajectory. But it's still something that's on like my calendar of things. Like, do I really want to move? It's just it's a life changing. Like, all these things have to come with me. And moving books are really hard. I have a lot of books. This is just a fraction. I was like,
they're so heavy. I know. Every time I would move there, like my friends and people were like, really, books? I'm like, yeah, they're coming with me.
Yep, all the time. I don't care how slow it gets there, as long as it gets there.
Yeah, I just love that you're just giving us this like history lesson, because I'm a huge nerd, and I'm like, yes, because especially with like Juan Flores, for me, that is where I really learned about like what a Puerto Rican and the Puerto Rican diaspora strikes back, right?
Yes.
Or even
This was the book that really put Wong on the map. It was called Divided Borders, Essays on Puerto Rican History. I mean, so he was the first person that ever got me published. I got published in the Central Journal, which is this academic journal for the Center for Puerto Rican Studies, and they did a issue in 2000 on like the next generation of Nuyorican poets, and it's like me, Mariposa, La Bruja, Anthony Morales. There's a lot of folks who are like I'm really close with, who I've known forever, and some of the people who like fall in the middle, like you either, because someone was like, "Oh, you're 3rd generation." I was like, "Nah, man, I was here in 90 something." Ha ha ha. And but I started really young, and I think the people I had as mentors were really important for that, of making me feel comfortable and like, yeah,
no, that's
you got it, kid. I was like, haha.
I'm just geeking out because I love this topic. But I think another thing is like, you talk about like you go back to Puerto Rico quite a bit. And I know that even for CUNY, because you mentioned CUNY, which is the City University of New York, which has like different 20, like almost 26 schools within the 5 boroughs. That I know that you've gone to Puerto Rico to after Hurricane Maria to help or assist and do workshops. Like how was that, and like what did it feel like to bring your work to Puerto Rico during that time?
So let me see, that was 17 until last year, 2020. Like I didn't go to Puerto Rico last year. And that was the first time since 2014. So that was about 6 years. So with CUNY, I work with CUNY Service Corps. Yes. Melissa Fernandez, who is, my man, 100 Grand, her sister is Mariposa, the poet. They, Melissa was one of the people who spearheaded CUNY Service Corps, and I was one of the trainers. And it is interesting. First of all, the first trip they sent me to Orocovis, which I was just like, where? I was like, I don't know where that is, and they're like, oh, it's here, but then it's all the way up. You're like, oh, but it allowed me to like spend like a good amount of time with people who don't go to Puerto Rico. Right. The last trip I took, I was in San Juan the whole time, and it's again, for me, being able to spend as much time in Puerto Rico on a yearly basis is always something that I desire, regardless if I have a full-time job or not. But it's the lectures. The lectures are the biggest ones, right? Like giving lectures and giving readings. Let me see. I was a keynote for this pop culture conference at at the university, and I was like, "You guys sure?" They're like, "Yeah." I was like, all right. So I'm gonna talk to you guys about Dragon Ball and Naruto the whole time, and they were like, "Yes." I was like, "How does that affect your work?" I was like, "I mean, it doesn't until I work on these poems." But I wrote a bunch of poems about like pop culture stuff. And then I did this. Me and Mariposa we did a lecture at the other university, because the two big universities in Puerto Rico is the one on the west side and one's in San Juan. And so the one in San Juan, we were there, and then Oscar Lopez Rivera showed up. And I was in Puerto Rico when Oscar got released, and that was a really big deal. And I never believed that if you don't go to Puerto Rico, you're any less of a Puerto Rican. I never believed in that, because things just happen, right? But I do think that the more you go to Puerto Rico, the more you see how you might not want to stay in the United States the whole time. I think the biggest thing of staying in the United States, even though going to Puerto Rico economically is not going to be very different, is just how it's an island, right? It's an island of people who are all Puerto Rican, basically, right? And it really just changes the way you look at things, And I think that was the thing with me is we had a show, like the band we did a couple shows out there, and I wanted to do this hole in the wall DIY punk spot. I was like, yeah, like I want to do it there, because the first time I went there was like this queer rock show, the first one they had there, and I was like, what? And I was just in my head, I was like, this shit doesn't exist in New York anymore. All those places have been gone, right? They've been wiped out since the late 90s. And I think that's the biggest thing, is like that they have all these pockets that you can really do things in. And that's the trips to Puerto Rico were life-changing. They've been so instrumental on how I want to approach the next 8 years of my life. Like, do I want to stay in New York? I love New York. I've had people say this before, a long time ago. Someone said, "I don't look at you as Puerto Rican. I look at you as a New Yorker." And I didn't get offended, because I know how much Puerto Ricans have influenced New York culture. So I don't know if they saw it like that, but I saw it like that. But now, I'm like, hey, don't say that. Don't get crazy.
Well, let's switch gears a little bit, because you mentioned the band and going down and playing shows. So outside of being an amazing writer and poet and performer, you are also a musician. You have this band, the Mona Passage, that just dropped a new album, The New Myths, and I was listening to it, and it does give me very 70s 80s punk rock vibes to it. Tell us a little bit about the band itself and then this new album that you guys just put out.
So I'm like, wow, these are not 2-second answers.
Oh no, we want to know.
I should have been a musician before poet, hands down. Like I was 12 when I started getting into rock music, and I'm not gonna date myself because everyone already knows I'm old as fuck. But I grew up with Nirvana. I grew up in Nirvana and Pearl Jam and Soundgarden, and I loved the two bands that really started everything was the Beatles and Jimi Hendrix. Like once I got there, I was like, everything just changed in terms of how I looked at things. But because I grew up in this, inner city neighborhood, that my mom wasn't gonna buy me an instrument. You crazy? Like that's just what are you gonna do with that? Make noise? And it's like, so it took me years to really say, oh, you know what? Like, just can I get a guitar? They're like, all right. So I got a guitar eventually. Didn't know what to do with it. And then you fast forward a few years, I started writing songs probably in my early 20s, which for me I always feel was so late. But I had this career as a writer that I was okay with. But I tell people all the time I should have been a musician. I should have been a drummer. So I want to be. I should have been a drummer. I feel like I know what I'm doing. But the band started when I moved back from Chicago, and I had this newborn. I had this brand new kid, like small and fragile and shit. And I just couldn't do the weekly poetry readings anymore. I had did them for 10 years straight, and I was like, I can't do that. I have to get a job. I got to take care of my kid. But I had all these songs. So I looked in the dictionary and I saw the Mona Passage. And the Mona Passage, if people don't know, is the strait of water that separates Puerto Rico and Santo Domingo. And there's a little island there called Mona Island, which you can't really visit because they have wildlife. And I was like, oh shit, this is it. And so we've been playing shit. We've been playing since 05. But with any venture of group activities, if I get a new musician, if my drummer leaves, if I get a new bass player, if I get a new singer, all these things. I never want to be the singer in the band, but sometimes you just have to do what you need to do. So this variation of the band is pretty much myself and my singer Yabe L, who is this young Puerto Rican brother who I've known for years. And it kind of, again, it happened organically. I had all these songs, and I asked him to come by one day, and I played him, I think, World on Fire. World on Fire was the first one. And he's like, oh, because I don't think he expected these songs to be funky, right? Or soulful. If you hear When the City Sleeps Part 1, which is completely influenced by the book, the songs are fast and they're a little aggressive because that's how I like my music, right? Depending on who I want to emulate or who I'm paying homage to. But with the New Myths, I really changed the way I started writing songs so that they can complement him. So I'm really excited with the record. And Tierra, which was home is the flower of the land. Again, that was him, right? I had it, and he looked at it. He goes, "Oh, this is really cool." And then he sings the chorus on top of it, and I was like, "That's pretty good." He's like, "Let's put it on the record." I go, "It's not really a rock record," because my thing is, I didn't want you do poetry for so long, and then you have this project, and people really thought I was going to have this poetry rock band. I was like, no, we're aggressive, shoegazing, all the labels you can talk about it. And so I wanted the band.
Oh no.
Oh, we seem to be having a technical difficulty.
Yeah, just a little bit.
These things do happen.
They do. I was like, I had to look at you and
I know. I was like, is it me? No, we're good. He is frozen.
Yes. All right. Okay. So hopefully he can get back on, because I hope that he can definitely continue and then also talk, end their show with just the one poem. But yeah. So
I'm just digesting all of that. If you haven't listened to the album and you're into rock, you absolutely should. It is the Mona Passage. I think we can. It's on Bandcamp. It's on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you listen to music. But it does have It does have a very like I get the Clash. I get the Led Zeppelin vibes. There's like a sci-fi element to it. There's definitely the poetry that he was talking about, and he's back, so I can stop talking about it. Talking about it is okay. You are not the first technical difficulty we've had on this show, so we're just glad you're back.
I blame Wi-Fi. It's always the Wi-Fi. So I wanted the band to have their own identity, like if someone ever said, "Oh, Bonafide Rojas in the Mona Passage," I'm like, nope, that's not how this works, right? Because if I wanted it to be a solo project, it would have been a solo project a long time ago. So I like having the band. I like what the band represents. So the new Myths is I'm really excited for people to check it out. And I get it. Not everybody likes rock music. That's completely fine. But I do think there's music for everybody on that record, right? Yeah, but the biggest issue here is, I'm a Puerto Rican dude from New York.
Yeah.
Right? Yabe's a Puerto Rican dude from New York. Rock music is not really high. I mean, we barely even have rock and roll stations the way we used to. If I go to LA, if I go to Texas, if I go to New Mexico, if I go to Chicago, huge rock scenes. And I'm just like, yeah. So, but shout out to Yabe L, and shout out to Pete, our white boy wonder, right? Piece of Starstick, who's an amazing drummer. And, we wrote and recorded this record in the pandemic. And I think I tell people that alone is something that I'm proud of, because the amount of obstacles I've had to deal with as a musician, that's why I give a lot of credit to Yabe, because he was a really strong pillar of no, we can do this, let's do this. And then if he ever was like, I was like, no, we got this. The record's coming out this year, no worries. So yeah, check it out. It's on Bandcamp, it's on Spotify, it's on Apple Music. It's on all your favorite streaming services. And let me know I always tell people, let me know what they think about.
Yeah, we're just talking about it, and you can definitely hear all the different influences that you have had in the music. And you say you're a Puerto Rican guy from New York. I don't know, maybe tap into the Mexican American demographic, because I don't know what it is about rock music and Mexican Americans, but we are like this.
I know. I blame Van Halen and Guns N' Roses. Honestly, they were so big. They were from LA. It was easy to like them. Like, yeah, I like that.
And then Metallica got the bass player.
Yeah, to the heel is great. Here's a little tidbit. It's completely random. One of my favorite musicians is Buddy Holly, because Buddy Holly was married to a Puerto Rican woman. And at the time of his death, she was pregnant, but had a miscarriage when they announced everything on the radio, which they don't do that anymore, right? They have to contact the person. So I always tell people, I go, we could have had a half Puerto Rican rockabilly punk in '77 who was Buddy Holly's kid. And to this day, I'm just like, the little things that, you crazy? Lubbock, Texas, bro. I heard she still runs the foundation, right? So little things like that, right? That's what New York gives you, right? New York gives you that.
I'll store that for the next trivia night.
Yeah, no. Also Bianca Jagger, she's Puerto Rican. Mick Jagger's one of his first wives. Don't sleep. We out here. We out here.
We're like our people are fine. I'm gonna say that. I'm just gonna throw that out there. I mean, like, yeah.
It's like that new meme of J-Lo. What are you talking about? You don't know shit. I know shit. And I was like, I know way too many women like that. That's my sister. My sister like that. She's like, "What? You're stupid. I know more than you do." I go, "Okay." But yeah, check the band out. Like, the band is it's always like, I hate to say it plays second fiddle, right? But for me, it doesn't. For me, the form of expression that I get through playing music is very different in poetry. Very different.
Yeah. And the fact that y'all recorded this during COVID, I can't even imagine just Wi-Fi difficulties and trying to be.
No, we were in the studio, but we had masks on the whole time. We would have
Oh,
masks on the whole time in the studio. The studio was really big, so we'd just play everything out
As
and
a
be like, have a good day.
Yeah. Well, props to you on the new album. Looking forward to the new books that you were talking about that you got in the works. Thank you for taking this time to spend this hour with us, having some great conversation, just schooling us on all things Puerto Rico. I know I learned a lot. I had my little No Pare Sigue Sigue shirt on, to embrace. But this has been fantastic. And we would just love it if you could just close us out with one more poem.
Fantastic. I will. Thank you. So let's see. What do I want to leave off with? Oh, you know what? I'll leave off with that because so like the interesting part about this particular poem is the poem is about what would you do if you knew tomorrow you were going to pass away, that you knew you were going to die. And the weird part about it is I mentioned my mom in here, and I just hope that she knew that she my mom lived a good life. So I'm always thinking about that. So this is called The Last Day. It was written for Juan Flores, but it's written for all of us, right? We want to make sure that we live a life that is worth living and worth writing about. So it's called On the Last Day. The last day will be a glorious one, filled with things that I love, like laugh with my son, read my favorite poems, listen to music the whole day, dance with my mother who hates dancing, tell my sister I love her and that I'm proud of her, call everyone I've cared for. I thank them for the years of friendship. I tell people on the street that they're beautiful, and I tell them that compliment is free. And I ride a train, I ride a bike, I ride a boat, I go to the tallest building, I scream something beautiful like I love you, and maybe someone will respond. I'll fight for my independence, paint murals of my heroes across my heart. Betances, Neruda, Albizu, Che, King, Kahlo, Dali, Miro, Miles, Malcolm, Lorca, de Burgos, Nin, Lenin, Hendrix, Bolivar, Martí, Ostos, Toussaint, Zapata, Zappa, Baraka, Ginsberg, Jaco, Coltrane, Cobain, Basquiat, and Garcia Marquez, and I thank them for their art. And I learned how to live on my feet and fly in my dreams and only kneel when I feel thankful. And I talk to the universe when I feel like no one is listening. And I apologize to those I should apologize to, and the rest I learned are still not worthy. I speak to my father who's been deceased for years. It's not the first time I've done it, but I tell him about my trips to Puerto Rico and how I think he would have been proud. I tell him how good the Yankees are doing. So then I go to all the corners of my life that are these catalysts. And I remember them and reenact them. And I see the young versions of myself, wild, stupid, rambunctious, ego-driven, hyper-sugared, up all night, graffiti sprayed and Broadway made. And I honor the past. I tell those moments, thank you for existing, for being a building block for right now. And I think about all the cities and countries I visited: Puerto Rico, Havana, London, Paris, Amsterdam, Barcelona, Brussels, Los Angeles, Toronto, DC, Versailles, Chicago, San Diego, Montreal, Oakland, Albuquerque, St. Thomas, St. John's, Tortola, Virgin Gorda, Rotterdam, Manchester, Boston, Berlin, Miami, and San Francisco. Then I visit all the houses my son has lived in, and I thank them for keeping him safe. Then I take a walk around the city that I love and hate, and I eat pizza from Patsy's in Spanish Harlem. I drink sangrias from Archer and Goat. And then I go home to the only place I've ever considered home, on the Grand Concourse, with a memory in every splice of hardwood floors. And I bring down the paintings. I pack up the books. I clean the living room up. And I open up this old black chest that has almost all the journals I've ever written in. And I take them out. And I see how erratic my handwriting was. And someone said once that it looks like a sociopath's handwriting. But I've never believed in a diagnosis given by a doctor who was paid by Medicaid. Then I read the first poem I wrote. It was called Life. And I read it to myself. And I see how ironic it was that this 17-year-old was trying to tackle something so massive as life. But I don't blame him. He had nothing then. He probably thought he would never achieve anything, go anywhere, be anyone, love anything, love anyone, or be loved. And I see the progression through the years. And I go to my bedroom window, the one that my son and I both look out of, and we look at the big sky over the abandoned church across the street, and I watch the sunset. And if today is my last day, I'll say, damn, I was a lucky bastard, wasn't I? Thank you.
Applause, 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 applause. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. That was Bonafide Rojas. Thank you. Thank you. I think I have no other words, but thank you for this, all of what you have given us in the past hour. So glad to have you on here, sir.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
No, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for your words and your work, and it really touched my heart today. So thank you. Yeah.
Thanks everybody for coming out too. Everyone on the side panel.
All right. All the people in Facebook Landia and YouTubeville. Bonafide Rojas, everybody. Make sure you go check out his new album, The Mona Passage. The New Myth is out now. And, keep in touch everywhere on the social medias at Bonafide Rojas so that you can find out when the new book drops. All right. Thank you, sir.
Wow. Whew. That's all.
Sigue.
That's
all I got.
Oh my goodness. I feel hello Puerto Rican right now.
I still feel hella Mexican American, but I'm treasuring that Puerto Rican feel because it was I really feel just like completely schooled right now. Like we had a history lesson. We learned about journey. We talked about family. Like I'm just
I know the huge like academic in me is just like geeking. I was like, yes, these are like who I've written about, who have like researched so much, and the fact that, and I think that's so beautiful about Nuyorican or Puerto Ricans in New York, that they literally have these random stories of like, yeah, I just bumped into this, or I'm friends with this person, and this is how our time was. And I'm just like, New York is sometimes just a special place, and then Puerto Ricans themselves too are just like larger than life. So
yeah, for sure. I think you definitely have a leg up living in New York, where you're like, I bumped into Allen Ginsberg on the street the other day, and we collaborated on a project. It was no big deal.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm still trying to find like a really nice celebrity like sighting. I haven't done that yet, but I do appreciate talking to like Nuyorican or poets or creatives, and they're like, let me tell you my story of like my journey in New York, and it's always so interesting, right? But yeah, this is a reflection of what it means to be Nuyorican in a diaspora, this like constant like shift of home, right? It definitely hit for me in so many ways. It probably hit for you as well.
Yeah, no, and I love how he defined it for the Nuyorican being a school of thought, not necessarily a people or an identity or a place, but this school of thought that I was just like, that's it. That's it. So yeah, that was that. Let's thank some people and get out of here, Rocky, because that was digest that. Well, let's thank the audience first. Thank you, audience, for tuning in and sticking around. I love your comments. Saw them coming in all night long. Thank you for sticking around for this conversation. Also need to thank our production crew, our production assistant, Dominique, who's working all the things behind the scenes, as well as Chris Conde, who has composed our theme music. Thank you for that.
Yeah, and then you can just definitely follow us on IG and Twitter. It's right here. You see this like beautiful orange line. It tells you where to find us. So we are on IG and Twitter at words and shh, right? And you can subscribe, rate, and review us wherever you go. And definitely you can just follow us to know who our next following artists are going to be.
And if you want to catch up on past episodes, we do have a YouTube channel, Words and Shit. Or if you prefer to listen to it on the go, because I'm a big podcaster, I like to just like have my headphones on while I'm vacuuming or sweeping or whatever. We are available wherever you get your podcasts, Words and Shit. So make sure you go and like, subscribe, rate, review, please, and thank you.
Yeah, and then definitely come back for us for next week. Same time, same place. You know, if you saw us on YouTube, go for it. Facebook Live, perfect. For our next feature, which is going to be Thursday, February 4th with artist Hyan. So, yay! I'm so excited.
Yay! Eres quien, everybody! For those who know, you know. For those who don't, be here next week. Until then, stay safe, everybody.
Okay, bye.